Elf, how immoral and degenerate in general such creatures must actually be, who order, carry out, or even just support such. It doesn't matter whether it's about torture, the death penalty or its enforcement, or about open-ended wars or murderous acts of secret services, sectarians, religious extremists, fundamentalists, or terrorists. Everything is reprehensible which amounts to quarrel, war, murder and mayhem, slavery, bondage, discord, unkindness, hatred, revenge and retaliation, as well as sectarianism, terrorism, and destruction, and everything that brings harm to human beings' life and evolution. Quetzal says, unfortunately, there are no limits to the immorality and depravity of all those in the world who can exercise power in any way. This boundlessness is also true with respect to the greed for money, wealth, resources, lands, countries, luxury, lust for power, revenge, retribution, self-perpetuation, pleasure, addiction and vice, as well as all imaginable material worthlessness, etc. Billy says, unfortunately, that is actually so. There, you are right. May I address you once again on what you already told me a long time ago but which wasn't written down as a contact conversation? With this, I refer to that which was perpetrated by the Japanese in China during the occupation period of the Chinese people in connection with weapon tests. As you mentioned, this fact is silenced, and consequently, very few of the Japanese people are aware of it, as this was also the case with the same or similar crimes under the Nazis, the Swedes, the French, and the Americans, as well as in various other nations in a military or private and scientific form, and is also kept secret up to this day and denied, which, unfortunately, can only be proven in most cases with extreme difficulty. Quetzal says, yes, we've talked about that. Of course, I can speak of it again. Billy says, then the whole thing isn't confidential. Quetzal says that is correct. Everything happened during the Japanese occupation in China. In 1942, through the high leaders of the Japanese, and indeed, without the Japanese population being informed about it, southern China became contaminated with cholera, plague, and with other diseases during a long-term and large-scale secret action. Moreover, it concerned a large-scale and long-term series of tests involving weapons. In this consequence, plague-infected fleas were dropped from Japanese airplanes on various areas of southern China in large quantities, which were then mainly spread across the country by rats. Many people and also other animals besides rats were directly affected by it, by what means the plague could spread rapidly, and eventually, hundreds of thousands became sick and very many died. The people of the then affected areas still suffer from this war crime today, which also won't change in the coming decades because the plague can't be fought easily and, therefore, can't be eradicated quickly, which is why in southern China, cases of plague appear over and over again, and this will also be the case in the future. At the same time, one should consider the immeasurable quantities of rats over which China doesn't become master and which are still today the carriers of the plague-infected fleas, which are transferred by these rodents to domestic animals and human beings and which allow illnesses to break out again and again, even if only sporadically. A fact that, since the end of World War II, has also been concealed by the Chinese government from the general public of China and from the whole world, and which will also continue to remain in such a way for some time into the future. The authorship of the incredible war crime traces back to a renowned Japanese army doctor named Shiro Ishii, who in 1940, with the consent of the Japanese heavenly shower Tenno, Hirohito, Emperor of Japan, brought into being the so-called Unit 731 and also led the murderous command in this. Through this unit, also tens of thousands of prisoners of war, Chinese, Koreans, and Russians, who were designated as blocks of wood, were used as experimental subjects by the researchers who bred and produced terrible strains of pathogens. The entire laboratory and research facility was officially and deceitfully handled as a wood processing plant, so that the terrible secret, which was really hidden behind it, wouldn't become known among the population. This happened in a laboratory in the northern part of China, in Manchuria, in a place with the name of Pingfang. However, not only were the plague pathogens investigated, bred, and produced in immense masses, but also very dangerous pathogens of other diseases and epidemics, such as Atlantises, a pathogen by which anthrax was released. Moreover, pathogens of typhoid fever and cholera were also produced, and so on. Then, the prisoners of war were infected with all kinds of bred pathogens, and once they became sick, living organ samples were cut out of their bodies, without anesthesia, in order to examine and investigate the effects of the inoculated disease strains in them, as well as to make further tests and to pursue researches. Of course, all victims didn't survive these tortures. Rather, they died in such pain that one can say that they didn't just painfully die, but rather miserably and agonizingly perished. Furthermore, it is still to be explained that a Japanese army special unit in Pingfang bred and produced deadly pathogens of diseases and epidemics and spread these all over the areas of southern China by airplanes as well as by railway and by all sorts of motorized road vehicles, causing hundreds of thousands of people to be inflicted by the diseases and epidemics, and very many died from it. Then, in Tokyo, at the end of World War II, when the war crimes trials took place, none of the Japanese researchers were called to account, through whose crimes 743,018 people were murdered, a number that was criminally reduced in a truth-veiling manner by the responsible persons of the court to just around 250,000, in order to make everything seem somehow milder than it actually was. In fact, only several generals were indicted. For the researchers themselves, it was negotiated that they would remain unpunished if they handed over the research results and all formulas, etc. to the Americans, which then actually happened, of course, and with which the American researchers and scientists pursued researches in the following years and decades and up to now, and they will pursue and continue to pursue these in the coming time. From the acquired results, vicious and deadly weapons usable for biological warfare naturally developed over time, which America also abundantly produced in large masses and has in stock. But it is specifically to be said to everything again that the whole thing isn't at the expense of the Japanese people, for these people had no idea of all the terrible evil that the researchers and the Army Special Unit brought upon hundreds of thousands of human beings of the Chinese people. Thus, the Japanese people can never be held responsible for such monstrous crimes against humanity and war crimes. The real culprits were the researchers and the army doctor, Shiro Ishii, and primarily the Shoatino, Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, who approved everything, and, of course, also all those who supported the criminal matter and all those who spread the deadly pathogens over the country. And finally, it must still be said that at the end of the war, there were still more than 600 survivors of the prisoners of war, but they were cruelly murdered, so that they couldn't make any statements about the bestial, murderous, and deadly attempts of the butchers against the prisoners of war and against the people concerned in southern China. Billy says that is what I wanted to hear again, so that I can write it down and present it to the public. The people of the earth should know by what bestial creatures their world is inhabited. This, however, not only refers to this story with Japan but also to America, Israel, Palestine, and Iraq, and otherwise to all nations whose criminal elements act in the way you mentioned or in a similar manner and bring death, suffering, murder, destruction, and annihilation over the people and entire nations and can still be praised high into the sky for it and think that they are magnificent, humane, just, and infallible. These creatures must be denounced because of their criminal thoughts and actions, so that the people can finally learn the truth and don't continue to shout hooray for these thugs and murderers. Quetzal says you will keep your word, because I know how serious this is to you. Billy says you're right about that. But now, again something else in the old history of Henok and the travelers from afar from the depths of space and, with these, the refugees of Henok's line from the Sirius region, There is talk of the fact that these chose a system with an already